When scientists named it, they used the word hallucination, because this thing simply should not have existed. 7 pairs of spikes stuck out of its body. It looked like it had been skewered on a rack, yet it was alive, and it had lived for 20 million years. When it was first discovered in 1977, paleontologists were completely stunned. This thing was just too absurd. Its back was covered in spines, and on those spines were claws. And the claws could actually move. Scientists studied it for 30 years before realizing they had gotten everything backwards. What they originally thought was on its back was actually its legs, and what they thought were legs were actually defensive spines. For a full 30 years, textbooks all over the world had it printed wrong. But the most terrifying part was not that. It was its mouth. A circular sucker filled with backward-facing hooks, made specifically to latch onto prey and suck on it like a leech. 500 million years ago, the seafloor was crawling with these monsters. Spines jutted from their bodies, hooks grew inside their mouths, and whatever they saw, they sucked onto. And it had another special trick. You could never tell which way it was going to crawl, because both ends of its body looked exactly the same. There was no way to tell front from back. Even after scientists dissected it for ages, they still could not figure out where its anus was. This was Hallucigenia, the strangest creature in Earth's history, bar none. But you think that was the end of it? The thing that truly made people collapse came later. In 2015, one scientist refused to accept the old view. He rescanned the fossils with an electron microscope and discovered an even more terrifying truth: that head, which had been studied for decades, was not its head at all. It was actually internal organs that had been squeezed out of its rear after death. Yes, you heard that right. The world's top paleontologists had held countless academic seminars over a lump of 500-million-year-old excrement, written hundreds of papers, made thousands of museum models, and discussed the structure of its brain. This was practically the biggest disaster scene in the history of science. On the day the truth was announced, the entire academic world fell silent, because it meant that the research of the previous 40 years had not only turned it upside down, but had also gotten its front and back reversed. Its real head was on the other end, pitifully small, long and thin like a noodle, with a pair of simple ocelli on it that could sense the strength of light. And the thing that made your scalp crawl the most was its mouth. It was a ring-shaped meat grinder, surrounded by fine rows of backward-facing spines, rotating like gears. Anything sucked into it would be ground into fragments. This way of feeding is extremely rare among modern animals. Only certain parasites have anything like it. Imagine it, a tiny worm only 1 centimeter long, yet with a miniature meat grinder installed in its mouth, crawling all over the seafloor 500 million years ago. Whenever it saw plankton, it sucked them in, and the barbs in its throat made sure prey could only go in, never out. The image is a nightmare. Even more outrageous was its survival strategy. In the mad age of the Cambrian, the oceans were filled with 2-meter-long Anomalocaris, 5-eyed sea scorpions, and every kind of super predator you could not even imagine. Hallucigenia was only 1 centimeter long. By all logic, it should have been eaten to extinction long ago, but it survived, and what it relied on were the 14 hard spines on its back. Any predator wanting to eat it had to first think carefully about whether its own throat could handle it. It was like a meatball covered all over in toothpicks. It looked tempting, but who would dare bite into it? This defense system was so perfect that even 500 million years later, thorny animals such as hedgehogs, porcupines, and sea urchins still use essentially the same strategy. But the most terrifying thing about Hallucigenia was not actually how bizarre it looked. It was its position on the evolutionary tree. In 2014, scientists discovered that the structure of its claws was extremely special. Each claw was layered like an onion, with 2 to 3 layers of cuticles stacked together. A new claw grew inside the old claw, and it replaced them by molting. This feature is unique on Earth. Only modern velvet worms have it. And what does that mean? It means that those velvet worms in tropical rainforests that spray slime are the direct descendants of this 500-million-year-old monster. And what are velvet worms? They are among the ancestors of arthropods. Once that clue was pulled, the whole truth exploded open. Hallucigenia belonged to the panarthropods, and panarthropods are precisely the ancestors of arthropods. Today, more than 80% of Earth's animal species, including all insects, spiders, crabs, and lobsters, can be traced back to this grotesque ancestor. In other words, when you eat hairy crab at the dinner table, you are eating a distant relative of Hallucigenia. When a cockroach scurries around your kitchen, That is a descendant of Hallucigenia saying hello to you. From a spiny seafloor monster with a mouth full of backward-facing hooks, to butterflies that can fly, spiders that can spin webs, and ants that can build complex societies. That process itself is a miracle, and Hallucigenia is precisely the starting point of that miracle. Even stranger discoveries kept coming. When scientists studied its eyes, they made a new breakthrough. Although this pair of simple eyes was structurally basic, it already had basic light-sensing ability. It could distinguish the intensity and direction of light. In the oceans of 500 million years ago, that was a huge evolutionary advantage, because at that time, most creatures were still groping in the dark, while Hallucigenia was already able to see the world. Its eyesight may have been poor, but in a world of blind creatures, the one-eyed man is king. It used those eyes to search for food on the seafloor, avoid danger, reproduce, and dominate the oceans for millions of years. Even the places where it was discovered are full of drama. Canada's Burgess Shale and China's Chengjiang fossil site. These two places are called holy lands of paleontology because they preserve the most complete fossils of Cambrian life on Earth. The Chengjiang fossil site in particular preserves not only hard parts, but soft tissues as well, clearly visible. Scientists can even observe the digestive tracts, nervous systems, and even the leftovers from the last meals of animals that lived 500 million years ago. It was under exactly such conditions that Hallucigenia's true appearance was finally revealed. The discoveries made here by Chinese scientists completely rewrote the evolutionary history of arthropods. In recent years, the story of Hallucigenia has continued to be updated. Scientists have found new species in the Guanshan biota, found relatives from 300 million years ago in Carboniferous strata, and even found its ancient forms in rock layers 430 million years old. All this evidence shows that the Hallucigenia family flourished for hundreds of millions of years. They were not failures of evolution, but one of the most successful designs in the history of life on Earth. From being mistaken for an alien life form, to the farce of having it upside down, from studying its rear end as if it were its brain, to the truth that shocked the world, Hallucigenia, with its bizarre life story, tells us this: the path of science is never smooth. Sometimes the truth we think we understand is only the surface of things. Imagine that ocean 530 million years ago. Sunlight filtering down through shallow seas, countless Hallucigenia slowly crawling across the seafloor. With 7 pairs of flexible legs, they searched for food. The 14 sharp spines on their backs swayed in the current, warning nearby predators. Suddenly, one of its simple eyes senses movement. A planktonic creature drifts by. Hallucigenia instantly opens its huge mouth lined with barbs. Powerful suction pulls the prey into its throat. The circular hooks ensure it cannot escape. The whole process takes less than 1 second, clean and efficient. That was everyday life 500 million years ago. A world beyond our imagination. And this tiny, bizarre little monster, with its mouth full of backward-facing hooks, with its body whose direction could not be told, with its bizarre structure that took scientists half a century to finally understand, left a heavy, vivid stroke on the history of life's evolution on Earth. It reminds us that evolution never plays by common sense. The most successful designs often come from the wildest experiments. That grinning monster from 500 million years ago is telling you with its strange expression that the truth is always stranger than imagination, and that we must always keep our awe for this world.